Hey, we're going to be talking about the craziest home inspections that my home inspector, Kris Houser, has ever been on. And this will be fun because Kris has been doing this for 15 plus years. And today, Kris is going to talk about his top 3 crazy home inspection experiences. And this is really important to you if you're thinking about buying a home anytime soon, because these are the kinds of things that can be lurking that you may not know about. Right, Kris?
Absolutely, John. Yep. It's really interesting. There's times when we show up to a house and, we start doing our inspection process protocols, and all of a sudden we open up in an area and you really, really see something that just, floors you. So and that just makes it so worth it right there, because, if people don't, there's a lot of people that do bypass the home inspection process, but
Sure.
this will definitely be a reason to get a home inspection on every purchase of your real estate transactions.
So, hey, I'm sure that you can go back into the archives, but is there anything recent that you've come across that you were just maybe almost astounded by, and like you saw it and you just kind of wanted to chuckle? Or
Yes, it would probably have to be an inspection that I did a couple of months ago. When I was in the attic, I noticed that a vent pipe had completely, on the water heater, had completely disconnected and was actually pushing in one area and just blowing hot gas and on a wall that was actually going to come up and actually go into burn on fire, because the hot gas was actually right there also too. It was pushing carbon monoxide inside the attic, which is a really, really a bad thing to do.
that's a pretty good way to commit suicide really quickly if you don't want to live any longer, isn't it?
It was one of those inspections that, most of the time it's a vacant house. You could see why people would just come through and say, oh yeah, it's been freshly painted, everything's great. And then, they don't think about getting up into an attic. And I'll tell you, this was a very, very alarming thing.
Hey, Kris,
Yes.
how did you present it to the would-be buyer? Like, you're looking at this thing and you're thinking you want to make them aware, but you don't want to freak them out.
Right.
How did you
Right.
present it to them, and did they get over it? And how do you know how things settled out?
Absolutely. Yes. So basically, the way I presented it to them was, this is something that, could happen at any time during this, the last couple of years of the house, could have been within the last 5 years. But, it's one of those things where it's great that we caught it now, and it needs to be fixed and addressed, just so that in the future it's supported the right way so that it doesn't fall again.
Okay.
It was repaired. That connection was put back, and then they replaced the wood decking that was actually damaged in that area. And
Okay.
I just explained it to them that, hey, look, this is another reason why, you hired a professional that, is looking out for you.
So, Kris, what you're saying is for $400, she kind of owes you her life, right? Kris, you're a lifesaver.
I was a lifesaver that day, boy. I'll tell you. Thankfully, if that house was occupied, I would have definitely went to the owner and informed them of it. I did get on the phone and inform the seller's agent. I turned the gas off to that particular component so that it wouldn't continue, just for safety reasons. But yes, if that was an occupied house, that would have been an all-out fire alarm. So
That's crazy, man. That's a good one. I'm going to drop a couple of words here and see if these help you recall any inspections that you've been through. That, how about aluminum wiring or piping?
Yeah, right.
Any of that stuff? Have you seen any of that stuff out there?
I have. I've seen a bunch of it. Yeah, the polybutylene piping is really a big ticket item, because if it's there, it's gonna pop, right? So these connections where they go in every 10 to 15 foot, they just start to deteriorate over time. And basically you just have a hose sitting up in your attic, and it's basically just about to pop. And when it finally does, it's just dumps water on and runs down and everything. So yes, I find those not too often, but probably once every few months. And when I do,
That's a lot.
it's the house that I found it on the last time was a house that my friend was purchasing in Scottsdale. And they had informed everybody that the whole house had been replumbed, PEX, which is good. But there's one section underneath the tub that still had this line, 2 lines that were running from the wall to this area. So I was able to determine that, and we were able to find it, and it needed to be fixed and addressed. But it's a bad type plumbing, material that is just kind of like a time bomb waiting to repair. We're waiting to break.
And so doesn't like aluminum wiring kind of have a similar reputation?
Absolutely. Yeah. So aluminum wiring is not a great conductor of electricity, as you and most people are aware of. Copper is much better conductor. The problem with aluminum is over time, when it heats up and contracts, it gets loose, and that loose connection can cause arcing, sparking, overheating. So when we do inspections for properties that are in the era of 1970s where they use that type of material, we spend a lot of time on those, inside the electrical box. We're looking at those connections. Sometimes we remove some cover plates, some outlet covers, and we look at the connections there, because you can repair those without replacing the whole wire. But you definitely want to make sure that that's something that, you have inspected. And then there's also a service to it. Every, 10, 15 years, you want to go back in and retighten up everything. So that it doesn't cause those type of arcing and sparks.
Hey, let me ask you this without, you've been doing this a long time, and I'm really curious more than anything. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but, there's all different kinds of home inspectors out there, some good, some not so good. Same is true of any profession, right?
Right.
And the
Absolutely.
same is true of real estate agents. And I think maybe you can guess where I'm going with this. Have you ever been on a home inspection where the real estate agent wanted you to bury the facts or not properly disclose your findings?
Yes. So we can.
It has happened.
It has happened. Luckily for me, I've got my spidey senses up, right? So if I feel that hey, let's not talk about that, or someone who's going to tell me to obviously bury it, that's not somebody I want to do business with, because it's just going to lead you down a bad path. Let's deal with it now while we can. The seller might be willing to fix some of these things. You never know until you ask.
Hey, 90% of the time, that's what happens.
Right.
Right? I mean, you just got to get through that uncomfortable portion of the conversation.
Right.
And that's why a lot of real estate agents hate we call it the BINSR process.
Right.
It stands for Buyer Inspection Notice, Seller's Response. And it's where we write down all the issues that the buyer has a problem with, and they want the seller to do something about it, either to fix it or to give them some sort of a contribution in lieu of repairs. And, it's oftentimes a difficult thing to go through.
Right.
However, at the end of that BINSR process, everybody seems to come to some sort of an agreement, and you move forward, or you cancel the contract and move on. So,
right.
But 90% of the time, we just get through it. That's what happens.
Yeah, right. You get through it, and the buyer makes the right decision. You help them through that process, and it's up to them on, accepting the property at that point. But you have to tell them all that information for sure.
Okay, give me one more doozy of a home inspection that you've been on.
Well, I'll give you, I'll kind of do, it's probably a little older, but in 2010, we had a lot of properties that were vacant, right?
Yeah, I remember those days.
A lot of vacant properties, a lot of properties that needed to be completely upgraded, right? We had ACs that were missing, some electrical that was damaged.
Kris, I remember they were putting cages around the ACs so people wouldn't steal the copper, and people were pulling all the wires out of the house, right?
Yep. Weekly, I would show up to a house and I would call the agent after I got there, and I would say, the water's not on, the AC's gone. We were just there yesterday, they said. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. We have no AC and no water, and they've stolen a lot of these things. So yes, it was very interesting. One of the times when I got to a house, I got up in the attic, and all of the trusses were cut straight down the middle. Literally, like someone took a chainsaw and went from, normally when we're up in the attic, there's a nice crawl space, not crawl space, but like catwalk where you can go from the AC
Yeah.
unit to other areas so that you could, do some work up there. It's
Yeah.
like he took a hacksaw and just kind of went straight down. And those type of repairs, are pretty large, right? Because that type of, you have to have the right repair being done. You have to have a general contractor look at
So
it.
Kris, were they just cutting that out so the air handler would drop down?
No, they were doing it for malicious reasons.
Oh.
When they were exiting the house during that 2009, 2010 time. So I saw
Oh.
all the trusses cut up in the attic, and I was like, so I called my buyer. They weren't there at the time, early, and I said, hey, I just want to let you know what I found. And I think at that point they decided to probably either
Buy a different house, right?
Yeah, exactly. At that point, there was probably bigger issues that we were going to be finding, or that we were going to discover at a later time. So they decided to kind of walk.
Well, that's a pretty good story there, Kris. All right. So if there was one more that you would want to share, what would it be?
So one time I walked into a house, and
This reminds me of Jaws. Remember that movie Jaws, when they're all drinking and they're showing each other's wounds?
Yeah, just like that, right? Here we are.
Let's get that.
This was at the time when probably water was turned off for some time, and then someone, from the city turned it on like a Friday afternoon, and I was going back out there to do an inspection on Monday because the water was off at the time. Mm-hmm. So I get there, I open my lockbox, I knock, hey, how's it? It was a vacant house, obviously. I open up the door and I feel this like warm kind of feeling. For some reason, there was a hose bib that was on, and it was spraying like a spray in the middle of the laundry room that kind of sprayed out. And those little small shutoff valves, the ball valves, if you turn it just a little bit, it'll spray like 10 foot, in the air.
Oh yeah, like a squirt gun.
Yeah, it flooded the whole house. I mean, I was walking in like an inch of water here, there. So I had to get on the phone real quick to the listing agent and everybody else. I'm like, hey, I didn't do this, but I discovered this. So that was interesting because it was starting to kind of form a little bit of like moisture substances and mold and stuff all over. And I got out of the house really quickly after that.
That's insane. Well, I know on one of my own closings that we were a day away from closing, and it was back, I think it was in 2010. I don't know why that year keeps coming up, but I think it was then. And it was like during a time where we had a hard freeze, and the client had asked me, do I need to keep my utilities on? I really want to pay them. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're supposed to leave them on for the buyer and for the inspection. She elected not to. And then, so I walked in, it was like, I was just going to get my lockbox off the house because everybody had signed all the papers and it was going to close that day. Well, it didn't close. You know why, Kris? Because the frickin' pipes froze and they were in the ceiling and they broke because of the freeze, and they distributed water through the whole attic and the whole ceiling, and the whole house came down. And, I knew there was something wrong because I walked up to the house and there was like there was like this little stream of water coming out of the front door. I'm like, what the heck? And I opened the front door and just, gallons and gallons came out of there. So they had to deal with that and resell
It's really interesting, the stuff that we see. I mean, you could write a book.
Oh man, we should write a book. Well, hey Kris, thanks for visiting with me. And if anybody out there is thinking about buying a house, I just want to urge you to get a home inspection and check out my playlist that I've got with Kris here on YouTube. You can check it out right here, and we're building that library of videos so you can see what's going on in the inspection world. We try to do a new one every week. So go there and check that out, and we'll see you there.